everyone. Welcome to Grid Roundtable. Joe San Diego here, along with Ben Schneider from Ben Schneider on YouTube channel and Last Card Out Info. And we have Joey Razul from Razul Racing. Link in the video description to both of their channels. And a big thank you to our Patreon subscribers. All of them, of course, very big and special to us. Calling the show, Mark, Robin, David, and Matthew. Plus our YouTube super chat and folks that have bought us a cup of coffee. Do the online. We could definitely buy us a cup of coffee or do the YouTube super chat. We'll thank you on the air, and you can even buy a cup of coffee or a super chat for a particular member of the on-air team. And of course, you're all joining us here for Roundtable. Be sure to participate in the chat room, share your questions, opinions as well, because we're talking about Las Vegas, Formula One, the Vegas Grand Prix. Gentlemen, the inaugural Las Vegas Grand Prix. For Formula One started off disastrously, to be honest. Free practice 1 was canceled after 8 minutes when Carlos Sainz got his car pretty much destroyed from a loose manhole cover. We know there's a class action lawsuit as a result of that. Of course, we're going to be learning more about that throughout the next coming few months, maybe even years with that. The rest of the weekend went smoothly, though. The race, that was a big hit. We saw plenty of passes along the long Las Vegas Strip. Of course, the slow corners, we even saw some passes there. And everyone was talking about the battle between Charles Leclerc and the 2 Red Bulls for the win. Plenty of passing. It was a hit for F1 fans. And it was the first time Formula One organized the event themselves. Put in a ton of effort compared to traditional events put on by another promoter. And there's a 10-year deal with Las Vegas for the street race. So, Joey, starting off with you. Will Las Vegas live up to the hype in 2024?
So this is really interesting. We see this when a new track comes in. Azerbaijan is a perfect example of a new track that we didn't really have a lot of faith in. And what was the result going to be? That first year out was pretty spectacular. And then how do you live up to the hype? It's tough to say that Vegas is going to live up to the hype in 2024 because as fans of racing, that was one of the best races that we saw all year. And, we could argue all of last year as well. But for the general public as an event, I think it was still a bit of a disaster. If you talk to somebody I'll give you an example. At work, I overheard a conversation between 2 people who are not F1 fans, and they kind of, went with the, hey, that thing in Vegas that you were talking about, did that end up happening? Yeah, I heard it was an absolute mess, an absolute disaster. So in the general public's eye, they have only heard the negatives. And we as race fans got to see the amazing race, and that kind of redeemed Las Vegas for us. To a certain extent. Ben, we'll get into exactly how much that redeemed Vegas for everybody. But for the general public, you look at an event like Monaco. Monaco stands as its own kind of pinnacle, as even if you're not into motorsport, you understand what Monaco is. And so in that sense, if you look at the event that Las Vegas was, more than just racing, the general public thinks that the event was a failure. So I found that really interesting because I definitely don't think it was a failure. I think it was a tremendous success. But there's an interesting juxtaposition when F1 racing, F1 events are trying to be more than just the race.
I don't think the race was a failure. I think the fans that attended the racetrack only on Thursday night are probably going to tell you their experience was nothing short of a failure. But I think overall, like you mentioned, the actual race itself that we got, certainly the race of the year in terms of the action on track that we saw, it's tough to say whether or not we're going to get that every year because, we have a very small sample size. We only have 1 race to go off of and no support races that preceded it. So, I think, like you mentioned, Joey, very early to talk about, we're not even in the calendar year 2024 yet. Will the 2024 Las Vegas Grand Prix live up to the hype? Very early to be answering that question. But I think that, when you look at how the weekend went, like you mentioned, I think there's still a very sour taste in a lot of people's mouths based on how the weekend got started. And to the point you were making about your coworkers there and what the general public heard of the weekend, I think if you hear that on Thursday night or on Friday morning when you're catching up on the news, and you hear how it's nothing but a farcical mess, and it's not getting off to a good start at all. I don't know that incentivizes people. Maybe it does if they want to tune in to see a crap show. But
yeah, absolutely.
People are not going to tune in on Saturday night or Sunday morning here for us on the East Coast with how late the race started, expecting to see a great racing product. And those that gave it a second chance, or those that are dedicated fans that have been looking forward to this event for a long time, they got a good show because they stuck around. But the fact that the weekend started off so badly, I'm not sure there was anything that was going to be able to be done, at least not this year, or that one weekend rather, that was going to be able to fully recover from that. So I think there's still a lot of open wounds from that weekend. I don't think, like we talked about on this show, last month when it happened, a $200 voucher is not nearly enough to make up for what those fans didn't get to experience and how they were treated and all that. So I think that there's a lot of work to do in that department as well.
Yeah.
But in terms of the 2024 race, the racing product that we got was great. I don't think you need to change much there. But if this, to answer the overarching question that we're discussing today, could this become a new crown jewel race on the Formula One calendar? There's a lot of logistics to iron out before we can even start entertaining the possibility of having that conversation of putting it on the same level of a Monaco Grand Prix.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think it has the potential to get there because the thing with the Monaco Grand Prix is it is so controlled by the Principality of Monaco, right? The local TV broadcast is handled by a Monegasque company, a Monegasque entity. The track is all handled locally. Like, so much of it is baked into the history and legacy of F1. We talked about Las Vegas Grand Prix being one of the first events that F1 is handling themselves. So they're kind of paving the way for them to build this into a crown jewel that they themselves control, which means that it should be able to be a lot more fast and agile than any of the other tracks. It should be able to adapt. It should be able to give people what they want, and it should be able to kind of sync up with what Formula One is wanting from an event. But to go back to what we were talking about the way that the Las Vegas Grand Prix started, for anyone who doesn't know, FP1 was red flagged about 8 minutes in. One of the Ferraris, Carlos Sainz, went over a manhole cover, and the downforce of the car sucked that manhole cover up into the car. It also happened to one of the Alpines, I believe. And they realized that all these manhole covers needed to be welded in. I believe they were already welded, but they were, just little spot welds that got pulled up by the downforce of the vehicle. They realized they needed to secure that a lot more securely. So they canceled FP1 and they delayed FP2 so long that the local staff, who were all union for security and other purposes on the track, were not going to be able to stay till FP2. So that meant that the crowd was going to have to leave, even though the team was going to do this running at, I think it was 2 a.m. when it finally happened. So anyone who bought tickets just for Thursday, which, let's be realistic, is kind of unlikely that someone is buying tickets just for Thursday. I know this was a tough event to get, tickets for. Actually, no, it wasn't. The event didn't even sell out until month of, because the prices were so high. So
that's the thing. It was tough to pay for the tickets.
It was tough to pay for the tickets. You're right. Yeah.
It wasn't that difficult to get into, but yeah, go ahead.
But so if you were the kind of person who bought tickets for just the Thursday of Las Vegas, you were expecting to see 2 hours of running and you saw 8 minutes. That's got to hit hard. But I think that is such a small sample of people, and the way people got so up in arms about this unforeseen circumstance and how these people needed to be kind of reimbursed or treated better. Did you know that we had an FP1 that was canceled in almost the same way this year, and nobody even remembers it because it's such a non-issue? Canada of this year, FP1 was canceled 5 minutes in Pierre Gasly stopped on track and they red flagged it. And then they never started the session again because of another unforeseen issue, not due to a crash or weather or anything like that. There was a problem with the CCTV cameras. So they canceled that session. Admittedly, the difference is that they extended FP2 and there was no delay on FP2. So people still got a little bit of time in FP2. But the difference in reaction to the cancellation of FP1 in Las Vegas and the cancellation of FP1 in Canada is so drastically different that it goes to show like how much people were ready for Las Vegas to go wrong, I think. And, you know, we had been seeing so much leading up to Las Vegas of like, oh, the streets are being torn up. The grandstands are blocking views. And, you know, what are they doing to Las Vegas? What are they doing to the city? How are tourists supposed to enjoy this space? All that kind of stuff that I think people were really, really ready for something to go wrong in Las Vegas. And the second that happened, that is something that a lot of people latched onto.
The complaints, as you mentioned, sort of makes me wonder this question for you both. I'll start with you, Ben. With the complaints about the construction before the race, we know they're going to have to do it again next year, but everyone keeps saying it's going to be much smoother because they're not repaving the track. They're doing a lot of repeat stuff. Could the headaches of this race on the local potentially jeopardize this 10-year deal?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this is the problem with trying to put on a street race in any major city. And you can just go back to the IndyCar debacle from Boston several years back, and what a nightmare that was. And Bernie Ecclestone's long dream of trying to get a race in New York City or with the New York City skyline. At least there were some tentative plans to maybe bring Formula One in New Jersey in 2013, 2014 or so. It is very difficult to pull off. And that's, I think, part of why, races like Monaco, or if you want to go down the IndyCar road, races like Long Beach, have been so successful, is because those organizers have years of experience to go off of. They know how to put on the show, and they know how to construct a street circuit, know how to do it right, so that it minimizes the disruption for the locals. St. Petersburg is another fantastic example for IndyCar. But again, you can, and again, very small sample size to work from. But if you want to go down the NASCAR path of putting Chicago on this year and think about all the hurdles and all the conversations that were going on leading up to that race weekend, again, the race itself, I think, was very much a success, especially given the way it could have gone with the weather that weekend. But I think when it comes to what Formula One has here in Las Vegas, there were certainly a lot of people that were not very happy that this giant entity that was Formula One was descending on the city and shutting down these roads and streets for so long and causing such a headache. Will the locals embrace it, and will they look at the product that we get? And again, this is part of why I think, what happened on Thursday is so important and can't be ignored. And maybe that, to Joey's point, is part of why the reaction was such the way that it was. The locals have to buy into it to an extent as well. And if there's enough uproar and enough concern that, what this race brings in isn't worth it to the disruption of the city, then, how many times have we joked that contracts are just words on paper, right? There are certain opt-out clauses and things that can fall through all the time. If the residents that don't like what they see get their way, or at least take something to court, the deal can certainly fall apart. So I think that, again, going back to the reaction from Thursday, if that's the general consensus among people in Las Vegas that don't like this race, that, look at how much of a mess it is anyway. I think there's absolutely no guarantee that every single one of these years, the next 10 years, we're going to have a Vegas Grand Prix to begin with.
Yeah. I think it's interesting. We talk a lot about the locals, and Las Vegas is one of the few places where we also need to talk about the other tourists, because the construction on the Las Vegas grandstands and things like that starts so early that you are affecting the tourism of Las Vegas for other people. I had some family friends visiting from England in, I want to say, August or September possibly, and they detoured over to Vegas, and they had kind of a terrible time because there was so much construction for the race already going on, to the point where it really affected tourism for things that weren't the F1 race. And that's not something that we have to consider in any other town, really, in any other street race. The other thing is that every other street race really isn't right through the city center. You know, we talk about other series. I think to Nashville track it for IndyCar. Yeah, it goes across the bridge and it's, you know, got some beautiful stuff going on, but they're not racing down Broadway. They are across the river, you know, near that sports stadium, and most of the roads aren't actually used for, you know, general commuting or other businesses or anything like that. Long Beach down here where I am in California is basically kind of outside of the city center in the port, in the harbor area. And all those roads are really just used for access to a couple coastal venues and things like that, hotels, that kind of thing, which are being used for the event anyway. So it doesn't actually affect the flow of the city. Whereas Las Vegas, that's the dead center heart of the city. It's what the race is there for, to see the Las Vegas Strip. And honestly, the way it was built, it's kind of one of the reasons that we had such great racing, because we had this huge straightaway that promoted the great racing that we had. So it's something that you can't take away from the Las Vegas Grand Prix if they were going to change the layout, you know, move it or something like that, because it is one of the things that made it so good, but it's also one of the things that makes it such a unique and strange street circuit.
Very unique, very strange, and I think you bring up a really great point. Long Beach, it's not in the hard downtown. It's pretty close to it, but you're not impacting everyone compared to so many tourists come to Las Vegas, not because of the race, but because family trip, you know, conference, conventions, so many things going on in that city. And F1, the construction, making it where everyone had to deal with it. This sort of makes me wonder too. You mentioned, Joey, about Formula One's motive. Of course, 10-year deal. They're hoping this goes through. The modern Formula One cars, they were great. This track really suited them. Compared to Monaco, it has not been a great show. In fact, Formula E has been putting on the best shows on Monaco lately. Monaco, much harder to get fans in there, especially a high number of fans. It's a train ride or drive through the mountains. There's one casino. Las Vegas, well, tons of casinos all over. Just look any corner, you'll see them. And of course, much more accessible. International airport, train, cars, the interstates are there. And of course, right now we're seeing a better show. So, Ben, I want to start with this because Joey mentioned about how with Monaco, there's a lack of control Formula One has. Formula One has full control of the Vegas Grand Prix. Do you think Formula One has a hidden motive to make Vegas their premier race over Monaco?
I don't think so. I don't think, you can talk about, will Vegas be, a crown jewel or something that, a lot of people look forward to, or a very highly prestigious race. But, as far as I'm concerned, I know fans complain about how Monaco is impossible to see any overtaking, and, it doesn't put on a very good show. It's nothing but a parade. And I share those concerns. I understand that you can't have just a parade. It has to be some sort of at least watchable product. But I think the solution to that is trying to find a way to alter the product rather than just saying this track is outdated, it doesn't belong on the calendar, because there's so much history in Monaco. Monaco, the Grand Prix, has been around longer than Formula One's been a world championship, for crying out loud. So if you want to talk about Vegas getting on the same level of Monaco, I'm not exaggerating here. You've got almost a century's worth of time that Vegas isn't even going to be able to catch up on, that it's, that far behind already from the get-go. To say it's a level crown jewel on the same level as the Monaco Grand Prix is. And I think when you look at, again, to go back to the question of this entire stream here, when you think of the other crown jewels in motorsports, the Indianapolis 500 has been around since 1911, the Daytona 500 since 1959, the Coca-Cola World 600 and Southern 500 similarly in the 50s and 60s been around for most of NASCAR's existence. The lone exception, I guess you could say, would be the Brickyard 400, which is coming back this year for the 30th anniversary. That had only started 1994, but it had the advantage of being at one of the most famous racetracks of the world. In fact, the track that calls itself the racing capital of the world. So from that perspective, any win at Indianapolis, especially on the oval, is going to be a crown jewel win or crown jewel
Yeah.
victory. When you talk about the Las Vegas Grand Prix, you're talking about a street circuit that's brand new. It's just being set up for the first time where we have absolutely no data to go off of. So I don't think, even though Vegas is a very glamorous and big city, I don't know that you have that same argument there for this race. So,
Yeah.
Obviously I think F1 and the FIA, they're going to try to build the Las Vegas Grand Prix up to be as big as it possibly can be and to be a big deal and to draw certainly the locals and the casuals in and some new viewers and a new audience. But I don't think that there's like this hidden motive that, okay, we can build this race up to be even bigger than Monaco, and then we can use this as an excuse to dump the Monaco Grand Prix as our crown jewel event, or the Las Vegas Grand Prix can replace Monaco when we talk about the Triple Crown. I don't think we're going to be having those conversations at least anytime in the near future.
Yeah, I think that you're right. I think that the Monaco is the crown jewel not because of F1, but because of the drivers, because of the legacy, because of what it means to the people that are actually on the teams. That all being said, I think that F1 does have a very, very short memory. F1 fans have a very, very short memory. And a lot of those fans, because of the prodigious growth that F1 has had in the last 5-10 years, a lot of those fans don't know the legacy of Monaco in the same way that others do. Monaco has been a parade for a very long time, and it's tough for a new fan to see the point when they haven't lived through the heyday of Monaco or experienced that, through watching old races and stuff like that. So when you have this kind of race that's not really a race versus, one of the most entertaining races we got of the season, you can definitely see why F1 would be pushing towards having Las Vegas being a crown jewel. And, give it 2 or 3 years. If we get 2 or 3 good, solid races there, it's definitely moving that way a lot quicker than I think any other track could. We could argue that they probably even tried that with Abu Dhabi, right? Making that the new crown jewel, having it being the end of the race season, having it be this twilight race, changing conditions almost guaranteedly as temperatures drop. And that hasn't really unseated, honestly, for me, it hasn't even unseated Spa as, one of the crown jewels of the season, right? But I'm going to take back one of the things I said, and that is F1 having complete control in Las Vegas, because we saw some serious evidence that they don't. And the stakeholders in Las Vegas are all of those casinos that we mentioned, and everyone that has some say in how this happens. And the biggest example of that was the post-race proceedings, where they had to park up their cars, jump in another car to drive all the way from the paddock to the Bellagio, do the interviews at the Bellagio, then get in the limo again, drive all the way back for the final award ceremony. And it's that kind of stuff that stinks of the corporate agreement and deals, and saying, this company paid us X amount of dollars for the rights to have this in front of their casino, and then also we have to do these things over here, so we're just going to have to jerry rig everything to make it work. I think that's going to be, if anything is going to hurt Las Vegas as being one of the crown jewels of F1, it's going to be navigating the logistics of making everybody happy.
So many stakeholders to try to make happy. One of the big things I felt, especially watching Las Vegas, when I was thinking about, okay, the accessibility for fans compared to Monaco, the way, as you describe it, having the drivers go all the way to the Bellagio, doing the interviews, there's so many ways I felt they were making this feel like a bigger event. Compared to Monaco, where it's a very tiny podium, in fact, it's the smallest podium, I think, out of any of the races, very tiny, but you have the royalty of the principality there present. They go to the racetrack, but very few fans could see it. They brought the drivers back from the Bellagio to the podium, had all the fans there. It really seemed like they were trying a lot of different stuff. And of course, we're going to have even more street courses, it seems, in the future. The one thing, though, as you mentioned, the short-term memory, in F1. For the longest time, we remember McLaren was the one team that was vocal that we don't really need Monaco. The cars are not made for this track anymore.
Mm.
The track itself is not exactly at the same level as any other track. And we always heard the rumors too that there could be no Monaco. With the explosive growth of Monaco, excuse me, not Monaco, the Formula One fans, Monaco being where it is right now, I got to ask you, Joey, does modern Formula One really need Monaco each year?
Well, I think if Norris out qualifies Verstappen in Monaco, they won't be saying that over at McLaren, for quite too much longer. I do think that Monaco produces some amazing moments in the sport. They just tend to happen on Saturdays because that is one of the most exciting qualifyings of the season. And let's be honest, we did get a really good, interesting race at Monaco this year. It was mostly, like weather motivated, but there can be good racing there. And we have seen some, it has been a giant killer at times. We've seen drivers make mistakes. Passing is not necessarily the measure of a good race. It's more a problem of the size of the cars and it being a spectacle there. Is it possible to still have the race be entertaining to watch if there's no passing and things like that? I'd argue that Monaco actually has that ability more than something like the Mexico Grand Prix. We talk about the stadium section at the Mexico Grand Prix being slow and fiddly, and it's not very exciting to watch the cars go that slow. Then we talk about the hairpin and stuff at Monaco, just as slow, if not slower, but that feels more interesting to watch because you're seeing these drivers have to navigate it, and what getting around that corner means for kind of the straight that's coming up through the tunnel. So yeah, in a weird way, it's not a purpose-built track, but it promotes more kind of tension than I think some purpose-built tracks do.
Yeah, well, need is a very strong word. I guess you can only look back a few years to 2020, and obviously we didn't get a lot of races that year, but correct me if I'm wrong, I don't think Monaco was on the schedule in 2020. I don't think it
it's a good point.
got a replacement date because of the pandemic, and Formula One survived that. So does F1 need Monaco? No, I don't think they need it. But you could count me in the group that despite my issues with it, and my belief that there are certainly things that we need to improve about that weekend, I would be very sad if the Monaco Grand Prix fell off the calendar just because of the history and prestige and what that Grand Prix means to the sport as a whole. And Joe, to your point, I'm glad you brought that up as well. Saturday, I think, is really, if we're being honest, the day that should be marketed the most when it comes time for the Monaco Grand Prix, because that's where I think you do get a lot of great action and some great storylines that come out of that. And, unfortunately, quite honestly, I think that a lot of times determines who's going to win the race, or at least who's going to be on the podium at the very least. We know that, if somebody like Checo Perez or, Charles Leclerc a couple of years ago, if they don't qualify, if they don't make Q3, for example, there's absolutely no chance they're going to have to work their way up through the field because they might only pass, one or two cars at the back of the pack at best because of how difficult overtaking is. So, there's still a lot, I think, from the weekend that is worth watching and worth paying attention to. Again, need is a very strong word, but I'd be very disappointed if Formula One actually took that step to remove the race from the calendar. I don't think we need to go that far.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's why I'm curious to see. I don't think Formula One would remove Monaco anytime too soon, but I do feel F1 management might be more pushing as Vegas is our biggest race of the year, because I know when it comes to other series, it's very clear, IndyCar, Indy 500, Daytona 500 for NASCAR. Formula One doesn't really put out that you have to be a Monaco. That is our grand spectacle. But I can almost see them saying, hey, you got to come to Las Vegas, the Vegas Grand Prix.
Yeah.
That is our big spectacle. And speaking about that, comment in the chat room from Adam. Monaco is a crown jewel event in motorsports. It starts an incredible day with IndyCar and the Indy 500. After that, the World 600, Coca-Cola 600 with the NASCAR Cup Series. And I think he brings up a good point.
That's actually, that's a good point.
It will be weird to imagine Formula One starting off with any other race besides Monaco. Now, granted, if it was Spa, Belgium, we'll see better racing. But I think all of us, especially growing up with Monaco, is just not going to feel the same. So this is going to be a question just off the top of my head for you both. If Formula One was to say, hey, we know that's a big race week in the United States, let's put something like Spa, so that way it's more racing, more action, and it's not just a procession for the Indy 500. Would the newer fans potentially buy into it, considering they may not be connected to Monaco like we are, where that's a tradition?
I would tell you this. I would like there to be no Formula One race on that day.
On IndyCar, Indy 500.
The reason I say that is because of what happened in 2017 with Fernando Alonso realizing that this is already a lost season with McLaren. The Honda engine is as terrible as ever. The partnership's as terrible as ever. We have no chance to be anywhere near competitive, really, frankly, the entire season, but certainly at Monaco. Why not just say screw it and go run the Indianapolis 500 where I will have a competitive car? And that's exactly what he did. And I think if we had, let's say the Monaco Grand Prix took place the weekend before, or maybe you even have a 2-week buffer because of the way qualifying is for the Indianapolis 500 now. I know that I guess you could theoretically buy a ride, but I know it's quite frequently frowned upon. I think that would incentivize, maybe I'll just throw his name out here, Lewis Hamilton, Max Verstappen, one of those guys coming to run the Indianapolis 500, even if it's not a superstar. Any active F1 driver that wants to, get one step closer to the Triple Crown or wants to come try this big race, the Indianapolis 500, it's now exponentially easier for them to come do that without sacrificing on the Formula One side if you don't have the Monaco Grand Prix take place on the same day. Because it's hard enough just to do the Indy Charlotte double. And God bless Kyle Larson. I hope everything works out next year and he goes on and puts on a heck of a performance in both races. Kurt Busch, I think, did a hell of a job in 2014. But you're not obviously going to make it across the entire Atlantic. I mean, that's just the logistics don't make that possible. You have to skip the race outright, which is what Alonso did to his credit. But if you had an off weekend for Formula One on that day, selfishly, yes, we would have to wait until lunchtime for a motor race. We wouldn't have breakfast at Monaco and then lunch at Indianapolis and dinner at Charlotte. But I think it would give us an opportunity to see something even greater for the sport. And that's a driver from one discipline coming over to try this race and maybe even having a shot at winning it like Fernando Alonso did in 2017 without having to skip a race at their day job, if you will, in Formula One.
I think honestly that cross-pollination of, having drivers jump disciplines, it does nothing but a good thing for both sports. You're pulling fans from one sport to another. A lot of people jumped over to watch Indy solely because Fernando Alonso was driving. And I think the team that has the ability to facilitate this crossover is McLaren, because they're being very kind of upfront about the fact that they have like Pato O'Ward kind of testing F1 cars. Oscar Piastri and Lando Norris would do amazing things at the Indy 500, I think. So, if that is something that they could start to kind of navigate with the F1 calendar, then that opens up a lot of doors. But let's be honest, F1 can't even navigate their own calendar because we can't even manage to get them to do 3 races in the same continent back to back. So there's no way that they're going to work the calendar around someone else's series.
Yeah, but I will say this one last point though. 2021 Monaco was on the 23rd of May. The Indy 500 was on the 30th of May. So you don't even have to go back but 2 years to a time where we had a Monaco Grand Prix. It came back after the pandemic took it away from us in 2020. And when they brought it back, it was the weekend before the 500. Now, again, I think you get an even better shot at that cross-pollination, like you were mentioning, Joey, if you have a 2-week break so that a driver can go to Indianapolis and dedicate their full focus to that. But, again, it's not, the sky would not fall if we didn't have that triple header for us here in American motorsports. If the Monaco Grand Prix was not on that same weekend, it wouldn't make the event any less special for me. And I think, if anything, it would open up the opportunity for something even more special with a driver coming over from a different discipline.
Yeah, and we all know that F1 does not make decisions of viewing times based around American audiences. Las Vegas being at midnight was proof of that. Midnight for me. Sorry, 3 a.m. for you.
Yeah, midnight for us in the Pacific was probably great for everyone in Europe. But yeah, East Coast America, they were up late. Speaking about Europe, in the chat room, Edward Hunter, they called him Jules in the crown event. Crown jewels, what Charles wears. Well, America, we also don't use the metric system as well, too.
Yeah, and we do everything wrong. Yeah, don't correct us on that.
And then Nelson Piquet attempted the Indy 500. Unfortunately, he crashed and then didn't make it in. And we all remember, of course, when Alonso didn't make it in the second time he tried to get into 500. You brought up a good point. McLaren was the team that, hey, we're not, Fernando, go try to Indy 500 because we got nothing. They got teams of both. They could be the team that could really benefit the most by trying to convince F1, hey, can we move Monaco the weekend before or after? Because I will agree, I would not be heartbroken if it's not 3 great races on Memorial Day weekend. It was just those two, but we saw more F1 drivers try to make it in the Indy 500. I think that'll be a huge win. Most likely they'll be from McLaren. If we do see Andretti Global, probably there too, but be really interested to see what happens with that. Now, speaking about Indy 500, of course, that's one of the oldest, most tradition-rich events in the year. When we talk about crown jewel events, along with Monaco, NASCAR, the Daytona 500, that's been around well before the 60s. And essentially, all these events have such longevity. But this has to raise the question. I'll go to you, Ben, for this one. Can Las Vegas, especially since they have a 10-year deal, be in a way become the next crown jewel event, especially after 10 years of potentially successful races?
Yeah, well, I brought this point up earlier, Michelle, but I think even if Vegas lasts for the next decade, even if there's a new deal after that, I think part of what makes a crown jewel event is the longevity of a tradition. You can't build that overnight. So it's going to take several years before I think we can seriously even consider putting this event on the same level as some of the other races like you mentioned, Joe. If we do get a lot of great Las Vegas Grand Prix over and over again, if it does become one of the best races on the calendar, and if the organizers do a good job of getting the city to embrace it, then I think, we can start saying maybe several years down the road, we might look back on this as, the birth of a new crown jewel event. But, even then, I don't think it's ever going to be the same level as Monaco. And I think the proof of that is the Long Beach Grand Prix is not the same level as the Indianapolis 500 in the IndyCar series. The Long Beach Grand Prix has been around for 4 decades now. It's a fantastic event. It's probably the second biggest race on the IndyCar series calendar. I think certainly now that Texas is gone from the schedule, certainly the biggest road or street race that IndyCar has. But if you ask a driver, do you want to win a Long Beach Grand Prix or the Indianapolis 500? Every single one of them is going to tell you they still want to win Indy over that race. So as special as Long Beach is, there's a certain level to the crown jewel that the Indianapolis 500 is. I think Monaco is going to be the same way when it comes to having these conversations about Las Vegas.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting one because, you start to talk about which race matters more to a driver. And it's usually, a home race will matter more than, any individual race. So it becomes this question of like where the heritage really matters, right? Because if heritage was all that mattered, then McLaren and Williams would be winning races. And it's more of a thing that, like, while we talk about what are the crown jewels and what is the kind of tentpole event, or what is the highlight event, that doesn't necessarily mean the best race on the calendar. That doesn't necessarily mean the best race of the year. That's not why Monaco is a heritage race, a crown jewel. That's not why the Indy 500 is a crown jewel. It's there It's a crown jewel because of the heritage. It's a crown jewel because it is an event that lets people who are not diehard fans experience the sport in some way. And because they understand what it is, regardless of where we are in the season, how much Drive to Survive they've watched, et cetera, et cetera. Monaco, interestingly, it's harder to experience that. It's more that we all just know that it's a very, very fancy event. It's like the Met Gala. We understand that that's fancy, but it doesn't mean that we're actually getting to experience that. And I think that's something that, the 24 Hours of Le Mans or Indy or Daytona have that Monaco doesn't. It doesn't have that accessibility for diehard fans or even new fans to come in and like be part of the sport. It is at arm's length at all times, and the fact that it's controlled by the principality, and the fact that F1 media has to make so many different concessions for the track, and the fact that it's one of the less appealing races of the season, all things that work against it. So I like you said earlier, Ben, I do definitely still want to see it on the calendar. It is something that is got so much tradition and heritage behind it, but comparing it to those other crown jewel events, it is definitely missing that accessibility.
Now, one thing you sort of brought up in Long Beach. Long Beach, I do feel, is sort of that second major event in IndyCar, but as you said, everyone wants to win the Indy 500. Long Beach will be special, similar to the Southern 500 in NASCAR. That's a special win, especially where it is in the playoffs now. But the Daytona 500 is the one everybody really wants. And of course, those races have been around a long time, but we have a lot of new events that come in. Nashville, for example, that seems to be really gaining traction. NASCAR has some tracks like Kansas, which provide good racing, but they never seem like, we don't hear that Kansas really stands out as sort of like, oh, this is the event everybody would really want to win, compared to other tracks. Same with Nashville. We don't hear everyone, I really want to win Nashville, compared to Portland or other tracks. So I'll start with you, Joey, on this one. Why have no newer races seem to really stood out? Because they always seem to be just with everybody else.
I would disagree with that. I think that there are new races and new tracks that have stood out. I think, when it comes to like kind of the Tilke tracks, the new circuits that all kind of have the same vibe, that's been a bit of an issue. But we look at a course like Jeddah, right away, everyone was talking about how formidable of a track Jeddah was, and it proved it, almost right away, with great racing, with hard fought qualifyings, and the even Max Verstappen having trouble getting around that course in the way he wanted to. So there are standouts, but they're not. There are so many different elements that make up a Formula One weekend, right? You have the qualifying performance, you have the race performance, you have the event itself, you have the coverage, you have, all these things to make it special. And there are very few tracks that do all of them well. When we talk about spectacle, Las Vegas, Miami tries, there, Abu Dhabi has great spectacle to it. But when we talk about racing, we talk about Spa, we talk about the Red Bull Ring, we talk about different tracks. So this is the disconnect, is that, like, I think we do talk about those tracks, but we don't talk about them for every point, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think there's a variety of factors. I think obviously you need to be in a big market or a big venue. You need to have the local population embrace what you're doing, and I think NASCAR has that in Daytona, IndyCar has that in Indianapolis. Maybe one day Formula One will have that in Las Vegas. I know there are certainly plenty of detractors there as well. The racing needs to be good. The event has to stand out in some way. I think that's why the Coca-Cola 600, formerly the World 600, gained crown jewel status, because it was an endurance test. It was most races are 500 miles or even shorter than that. But all the big races are 500 miles. This race is even bigger. It's 600 miles. So you get your crown jewel status there. For Southern 500, very similarly, it's back in the day when most of the races were on dirt tracks, that was a super speedway. It's not a super speedway compared to Daytona or Talladega, obviously. But it felt like a big deal. It was a big racetrack with a lot of prize money and a big race purse. So I think when you talk about Kansas, for example, Joe, the racing at Kansas can be phenomenal. Kansas can be one of the best races of the year every year. But if it's just another mile and a half, if it pays out, I know the race purses, I guess the purses are still public. The individual payouts aren't nearly as public as they used to be pre-charter system. But if there's nothing super special about the prize money or anything, if the local community doesn't get super excited about it, if there are empty seats in the grandstands every year, well, then there's not really much going for it to justify giving it that same crown jewel status as your other 4 crown jewel races there. So I think there has to be a perfect storm of elements that come together to make an event a crown jewel. And when they all do, it's pretty self-evident and you'll recognize it when you see it.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I'm going to hijack this for a little bit because we've talked about the heritage that has to be there for a crown jewel event. Do you think that can be revitalized in the way of, let's say, bringing back like a Laguna Seca or a Watkins Glen to F1? If the amount of money that was pumped into Las Vegas had been pumped into Laguna Seca, do you think that could have built a crown jewel event quicker and more acceptably?
In an alternate universe where I think that's even a remote possibility, I'm sure it would. But I kind of compare, because people talk all the time, like bring Formula One back to Watkins Glen.
Yeah.
I feel like the example I always use is bringing Formula One back to Watkins Glen. It'd be like trying to bring the Olympics back to Lake Placid, New York. And I think that, as much attention as that would draw, as great as that would be for local communities, I think the spectacle that the Olympics are, you're not going to go back to 1980. I mean, it's just so big of an event now that Lake Placid really, I don't think is a viable option for hosting an event of that scale. It has to be in a much bigger market, much bigger city.
I feel like I could say the same thing about Qatar, though. As far as hosting an event,
I suppose, but I think when you look at, what the FIA has now with the Grade 1 specifications and everything that all the tracks have to be up to. What you would have to do to Watkins Glen just to get it up to that level where it could theoretically host a Formula One race. And what that would do to the surrounding area of the track and everything, and again, talking about the local community and everything, would that really be worth it just to put on a motor race there like you did in the same way 40 years ago? I just don't know. Sometimes I feel like the spectacle has kind of outgrown a market like that or a track like that, and what you would have to do to bring it back, I just don't know if it's viable in this day and age. As awesome, as spectacular as it would be, and if you could do it, how big of an event it would be, I totally agree with you on that. But I just don't know if it's logistically possible in this day and age.
So tracks that are not surrounded by, residential areas in small towns, tracks, that have the room to grow into a Grade 1 course. I would think of, possibly something like a Sonoma, that's out in the middle of nowhere. That Sears Point area is just, there's nothing there.
I'll tell you, from going to the Cup race the last 2 years, there's one entrance into the track. My friend and I, it took us 40 minutes to get into the track on Sunday because there's maybe a second back way, but most everybody's coming into one entrance.
But if
I don't know how there's not a second entrance there with all that land and everything.
Exactly. So if all it needs is an infrastructure beef up, to be able to support F1. See, guys, really what I'm doing is I just want a California race. I just want to be able to, like, Las Vegas is actually my closest race now, and I have to go to Nevada to do it. So if I can get a California race, that's really the motivation behind all this.
No. Well, hey, I'm trying to bring IndyCar back to Nazareth, so I totally get the local aspect of it there. But yeah, I think that, again, it's fun to dream about, and it's like, but again, IndyCar back to Watkins Glen, absolutely. I think it's a crime that we're not going there with that series, and that bringing it in as an emergency replacement for Boston, not being able to get off the ground, and then only lasting 1 year after that before it went away again. I think was a real shame. The NASCAR event that happens there obviously is one of the best road course races in the minds of a lot of fans every year. But, trying to bring F1 to a track like that in this day and age, I just feel like it's kind of a different animal. And I fear that ship may have sailed quite a bit. How much work would have to be done, not just for the track itself, forget the surrounding area and the market and everything. Would Watkins Glen really still even be Watkins Glen after all the work that's done to get it up to grade 1 specifications? I think that's something to consider as well.
That's a very good point. And, that's something that we ignored a little bit when we were talking about the other street circuits. We're talking about Nashville, Long Beach, Chicago. Those are tracks that are being built up for, let's be honest, like we love IndyCar, we love NASCAR, but the buildup for a race weekend, as far as the logistics and infrastructure, is not at the same scale that would need to be for F1. So the buildup for Las Vegas, even if that did happen in Long Beach or Nashville, it probably would have had a lot more impact than those two tracks do currently, if that makes sense.
One of the things that stood out as you were all talking was about how we need big markets for these events. And the one exception would be, I think, the Southern 500, small little Darlington, South Carolina. I still remember, hey, we're going to take away the Labor Day weekend from the Southern 500. We went to Auto Club Speedway in Los Angeles, bigger TV market, more accessible. There's even train access there. And it just seemed it never caught on to the point where, okay, it's going to Atlanta, bigger city, more access. Didn't catch on. Okay, we're bringing it back to Darlington. And now it seems like everyone's happy with that. But we are seeing the increase, as you all mentioned too, about some of these street races. Chicago, Nashville here in the United States. There's news about Madrid coming for Formula One now.
Yeah.
So I have to ask you, and I'll start with Ben on this one. With street courses like Chicago, Madrid, Nashville, is street racing sort of the future potential for big events that F1, IndyCar, NASCAR are looking at to be potentially their big events besides their crown jewels?
Yeah, you're saying, so if we're talking about races that could be crown jewels in the future, would street races be the most likely candidates? Is that what you're asking?
Yes.
Yeah, I think so. And I think that the evidence for that is probably with Chicago and NASCAR. I mean, if you had to name an event that, I know we're bringing back the Brickyard 400, in 2024, but after your big four, your four majors, your four crown jewels, if you will, which is the next biggest NASCAR race on the calendar, I think a lot of people would say the Bristol Night Race, and then they'd probably go to Chicago just because of the hype around that race this year, because of the TV ratings that it drew in, because NASCAR's, at least not in the Cup Series, I know the Pinty Series has done some street racing up in Canada in the past, but NASCAR Cup had never done a street race before. It was a brand new idea, and Chicago was the first one to get that to their city. I think that when you look at all those factors in the hype around that race, Chicago would certainly be a candidate to be a future crown jewel if the race stays on the calendar long enough and isn't plagued by local issues in the city and logistics of trying to get the circuit set up every year. But Joe, I just want to go back to what you brought up with Darlington as well, because I think that was an interesting point that we haven't really touched on, because Darlington, I think, really is the exception to that. Like you said, it's in a very small town with, kind of the middle of nowhere, so to speak. That's the one event that market has that draws people in once a year. And I still remember Slapshoes in one of his videos saying, if I could only go to one race a year, I would go to Darlington, even though it's not the closest race to me, even though it might not be my favorite racetrack. Going to that race and going to support the local economy because they don't have any other pro sports or any other major events would be an important factor there. And I think you saw, again, to the point he brought up in another video as well, there was a time where it looked like we were going to lose the Southern 500 because they took it away from that Labor Day time in the schedule. And there were a couple of years, I think, in the mid-2000s where they weren't even calling it the Southern 500 anymore. I think it was like the Dodge Charger 500 or something. They'd taken it off the name, just like they've taken off the World 600 name from the Charlotte race. So, maybe that's, something that you could consider as well. Not being in a major market, could that cause you to potentially lose not just your crown jewel status, but your race as a whole? Obviously, and thankfully, NASCAR went down a different path and brought the race back and even brought it back into that Labor Day time frame there. But I think that's a very interesting point to consider as well. Is I think regardless of whether or not it's a street race, most of your other races, like I know that Charlotte Motor Speedway is technically in Concord, but you have a major market there in Charlotte, not too far away. Obviously Indianapolis is technically in Speedway, Indiana, but that's a pretty major market and city with Indianapolis. They have a couple of pro sports teams as well. And obviously Monaco and Las Vegas are really big and glamorous cities with, you certainly can't make the middle of nowhere argument there. So
Right.
it's interesting that the Southern 500 got off the ground the way it did, despite not having that to its advantage. I just thought that was an interesting point that you brought up there.
And I think that F1 does have, similar tracks. We talk about like Zandvoort or Austria. They're not quite in the middle of nowhere, but certainly compared to other tracks, it's not a market that is necessarily super huge. What is happening is that Zandvoort has that legacy and has history and has pedigree to it. That was one of the reasons to go back there. Max Verstappen was another reason to go back there. So there does have to be some kind of impetus. It doesn't necessarily have to be kind of the local infrastructure and the market in the area. We do see what you were saying of Auto Club Speedway not working out. It does seem like the West Coast doesn't work as well for NASCAR and IndyCar as a lot of the East Coast and Midwest does, just from a market standpoint. I think that's a very good point. But what you were saying about street races and how we're getting more street races popping up and they have more potential possibly to become the next crown jewel. I think one of the reasons that we're seeing more and more street races is because all of these race series are looking for ways to expand their markets, and street circuits are the fastest way to do that. We look at something like COTA, that was a purpose-built track to be a grade 1 track for Formula One. The build on that took a lot of time, it took a lot of money, and it took a few years for them to get their money back. As opposed to Las Vegas, the announcement for that was less than 2 years before the event actually happened. Now, granted, that also has a 10-year contract, and I think part of the 10-year contract is making back the money that they, got on the initial spend, but I don't think it needs 10 years to make that money back. I think that's just part of the contract. But one of the reasons that we do these street circuits in the way that we do is because they can be built up quickly and they can be abandoned just as quickly if something goes wrong. So that's also like a big strike against these for becoming crown jewels. One of the reasons that Monaco is a crown jewel is because of what we feel like we would lose if it was gone. If something like, Baku or Chicago or, Nashville or Las Vegas is not on the calendar next year or the year after that, I don't think any of us would feel the impact as much as if we lost a Spa or a Monaco or anything like that, where that legacy plays such a big part. They're designing these street circuits in a way that if the event doesn't work out, they can abandon it and it's no skin off their nose. It was an experiment. They'll move on to the next experiment next year. And the idea possibly is for people to feel like, oh, what are they going to do next? Not, darn, I wish they had kept that, which, I think is a little bit of a detriment. I'd like to see some more purpose-built tracks on the calendar, but the street circuits mean that they can go into new markets and take advantage of that in ways that they probably couldn't with a purpose-built track.
One of the interesting things with the street courses, as you mentioned, we remember with CART, they brought in the Houston Grand Prix, which was sponsored by Texaco Haviland when they were hugely involved with the Andretti's, Newman Haas Racing. That didn't last. IndyCar has a lot of street courses from Denver, Miami, all over.
Mm-hmm.
None of them seem to really catch on. And of course, with street courses, you're dealing with local governments, which are going to have different elected officials. We know NASCAR, Chicago, there's a lot going on between the elected officials and NASCAR there. Really hard to organize, but it does seem like, as you say, the quick route to, rather than spend millions, now billions of dollars for a facility to host racing, is put it on the streets. The fans are much more closer, especially Chicago, Las Vegas, Nashville. You got international airports, highways, Amtrak service to get there. then get
Yeah.
fans out compared to Sonoma, where huge facility, but only one entrance and a long drive, little bit of work. Definitely
Yeah.
could be interesting to see.
The appeal of, we talked about the fact that, we have a racetrack in Las Vegas. We have 3 racetracks in Las Vegas. Las Vegas Motor Speedway could have been an option for F1, but if you race at Las Vegas Motor Speedway, you're not in Las Vegas. You're near Las Vegas. Whereas when you're going down the strip, you are in Las Vegas. And whether you're a fan of F1 or not, you understand the weight of that. I think that's, the biggest appeal of street circuits. So you can look up and you can see buildings, you're not seeing grass runoff and tracks start to look a little bit the same to the untrained eye, especially when they're all designed by the same person.
That's one thing that does stand out with the Las Vegas Motor Speedway. You hear, oh, they're racing Las Vegas NASCAR. You have the idea, oh, there's the strip, there's the casinos. But you watch the TV coverage, it looks very similar, not exactly. It's very similar to Atlanta, to Texas. The only difference is they have yellow walls for the Pennzoil sponsorship. Very interesting stuff. And of course, we encourage everyone to chat in the comment. Especially, we're going to switch over to a simple question of the week. And we're going to start off with Ben answering this question first because we've been following the news. And this week has been something else for both the FIA, Mohammed bin Sulayem, and IndyCar, Roger Penske, of course, with the FIA, F1 management, the mess over the investigation claims, then the statement, and then all their teams responding. And then now the FIA saying, nope, we're not investigating no more. Now, IndyCar, Roger Penske, oh, we're going to delay the hybrid to after Indy 500, and then Racer Magazine reporting that Honda, after 2026, they're looking at saying goodbye. So, Ben, who's having the worst week, the FIA or IndyCar?
I've got to confess, I've tried to tune out the whole FIA issue as much as possible, just because it's such a messy situation. I feel like it's just more political crap that we deal with all the time in Formula One and the FIA. And I'm not minimizing the importance of it all. And I think what the Wolf family has had to go through, Toto and Susie in particular, is just absolutely awful. And I'm hopeful that we can kind of put it behind us here after this investigation goes through, and that they're cleared of any wrongdoing. I just think it's a shame that one not so reputable outlet putting this question out here has led to all this. It just, I think, kind of goes to show the power that we have and the responsibility that we have as multimedia outlets here, to do our jobs responsibly. But that being said, I still have to give the edge to IndyCar. And I said in a tweet I posted on Threads earlier this week, history is not going to remember Roger Penske's tenure very kindly. If you think of everything that has happened since he took over, I'm obviously it'd be absurd to hold the pandemic against him. But if you think of how the series has kind of come out of that, we still don't have the Freedom 100. I can understand not holding that race in 2020, but I don't understand why that race hasn't come back yet. We still haven't had a video game in almost 20 years. It looked like we were finally going to get that one. They were so confident in Motorsport Games that they even signed an exclusive deal with them. They killed the whole iRacing part of that deal. And then Motorsport Games fell apart. So now we're back to square one on that one. I don't think that game's ever going to see the light of day, despite it being nearly finished. The whole team's been laid off. That's a whole debacle. We're still on the same chassis for all intents and purposes. I know we've gone through a couple of different aero kits, but the core chassis itself is still the same DW12 that we're going into our 13th season with. So there's been very minimal, if any, progress over there. And then you talk about the hybrid technology and having to delay that. I mean, it's just been a whole comedy of errors these last several years, to the point where you have IndyCar fans on social media openly saying, yeah, I'm not 100% sure that this series is even going to make it to the end of a decade. And while I think that might be a slight overreaction, I'm not saying I would put money on it. The fact that you have fans saying that, the fact that that's even out there as a question, as a possibility, that does not speak very kindly about what Roger Penske's tenure has looked like as the owner of the Indianapolis Motor Speedway and the IndyCar series in particular. And I know we brought up this point on the Encore show after the schedule came out. Particularly for our young drivers, there's no Freedom 100 in Indy next. There's no race at Texas next year. Your first laps with that aero kit, the Super Speedway aero kit, if you're an IndyCar rookie right now, would be your rookie orientation at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway for the 500. So how are we preparing our young drivers to come up and compete in the biggest race of the year? And that doesn't even get into all the behind-the-scenes issues with having to delay the hybrid technology for the power units and the engines, and finding out that if the cost situation doesn't get brought back in a little bit, that with your longtime partner in Honda might be saying, hey, what are we doing here? There's better places where we can spend our money. Let's pull out of this series. That they're even having those discussions prior to, 2026 is not that far away. How bad would it be if you lost Honda as an engine partner? Just picture that for a second. Think about that for just a minute here. Try to imagine the IndyCar series without Honda right now, and all the chaos that would send the teams that run Honda engines in the entire series into. I think unequivocally, when you look at everything that's gone on, in the last week in particular, but even just all throughout Roger Penske's tenure, it has not been a very good one. I still have a tremendous amount of respect for Mr. Penske and all that he's accomplished in the sport as an owner and all that. But as an executive running the show, it has not been very good. And it has particularly been an awful, terrible, no good, very bad week for Roger Penske in the IndyCar series here, based on a couple of recent developments that could spell some very bad news for the future.
Bad news for the future for IndyCar, if everything is what was reported true. For the worst week, I gotta say it has to go for me to the FIA, because we all know there's a lot of politics, like you said, been in Formula One. One of the big things with what we saw going on this week, I think the management aspect of Formula One, FOM, FIA, a bigger gap now, and with the increase in value of F1, I feel the split that we've heard about from the 90s, the early 2000s, breakaway series, all that could become more and more potential. And the other thing, too, it seems that over there in the FIA, they could always vote out, get a new president. I think that could be something where down the road it'll be really interesting to see what happens, especially as Formula One is just expanding 24 races this year. A lot of moving parts, a lot of politics, including we know the debate about Andretti Auto, Andretti Global trying to get in. FIA is supportive of that, FOM not. I just think this is going to be making that gap even greater. Joey, FIA or IndyCar having the worst week?
I am tempted to say that IndyCar is having the worst week. It's always funny from an F1 perspective to hear that Honda is pulling out of a motorsport, because whenever that happens in Formula One, great stuff follows. That's how we got Braun GP. That's how we got the run of Max Verstappen and Red Bull dominance that we're in right now. Honda kind of threatening to drop out of the team there, and they're still kind of involved. It's kind of back and forth as to whether that engine should technically be called a Honda or a Red Bull racing motor, whatever you want to call it. But as far as what is going on with Toto and Susie Wolf, it does seem a little strange that if there were any kind of complaints to have against the two of them, that's not being brought up during the season. If you want your drama to get on Drive to Survive, you got to do it during the calendar year. So I don't know. I think this is a little bit of, it's a lot of nothing in a weird way. And definitely for F1, we're talking about, we've had the Max Mosley, Bernie Eccleston days in the past. So this is small potatoes compared to what F1 has dealt with.
Max Mosley, Bernie Ecclestone, when those two were running F1,
yeah,
very, very different compared to what we have now.
Yeah, I mean, even more recent, you think back to like Vijay Mallya running Force India, or the Rich Energy scandal and stuff like that. Yeah, F1 has weathered so much more scandal than husband and wife talking about work over dinner.
And that's the thing. I feel, from my experience, if you have Susie Wolf working with F1 Academy, I would have to say there had to be some sort of internal process that, okay, Susie's, with Toto, so she's excluded from these meetings because there's potential conflict. The thing one, not exactly reputable news outlet could create such a stir, run wild with it.
Yeah.
It just shocks me that that occurred, and what a crazy, crazy week that FIA won't forget, and of course IndyCar won't forget. However, Wednesday on Grid Tonight, we will be talking about IndyCar as one of our top stories. IndyCar and the Honda partnership coming to an end after 2026. We'll be talking about the latest reports. We're going to have everyone on Grid Tonight to discuss all the things going on and all the moving parts. And of course, the best way to be sure to subscribe to the Grid Network right here on YouTube. Hit the bell icon so when we go on the air Wednesday, you're not going to miss Grid Tonight. It's the off season, so we're looking at more roundtable discussions. So be sure to subscribe, hit the bell icon, and also if you like what you saw, buy me a coffee. You could buy a cup of coffee for myself, Ben, or Joey. Definitely will be great. YouTube Super Chat. If you're not watching us live, you'll see the thanks button there. You could do that, and the person will thank you on the air. Calling the show, Mark, Robin, David, Matthew. They invest in us each and every month through Patreon. We'll read their names at the beginning and the end of each program. And of course, they get exclusive stuff, including our Grid Network stickers, which we mailed out to them, and so much more. And of course, this all helps us plan for 2024. Big 2024 year for us. It's all going to start off with Formula E, January 13th, the first race of the grid ranking for 2024. And then a couple weeks later, 27th, we got the Rolex 24. So it's going to be a lot of fun as we get to 2024. For Joey and Ben, I'm Joe. Thank you for watching today's program. We'll see you next time. Thank you for watching us right here on YouTube. Be sure to subscribe and check out some of our other videos, including Life on the Grid, where we interview folks from the motorsports industry. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.